My name is Trish Carter, and it is my absolute honor and joy to serve Cedarfield as a chaplain. To my left is Kathy Moran, social worker extraordinaire, who's been here for
23 years.
23 years. And Dr. Greg Cook,
Who was born 23 years ago.
who has not been here for 23 years yet because he was still in middle school 23 years ago, is that right? Something like that. So, end of life is such a broad topic, and it is, quite frankly, an uncomfortable topic for a great many people, which might explain why we don't have as many people in the room right now as we did for the Veterans Day program the other day. It's difficult to talk about. So I applaud your being here to be ready to listen or to share, and I want to, at the very outset, manage our expectations. We may end up with more questions than answers, and that's okay. You will give us a building block to go on. Each of our programs get better and better with your input and thoughtfulness. So I have a few slides to begin. Some of you, if you were at the Last Things First program I did in September, will have seen a few of these slides before. But for me, the idea for this program began with an envelope. An envelope that my mother-in-law gave to my husband and to me, upon which was written, "Open if I die." Not when, if. Open if I die. I thought that was very illuminating. So there are at least two things that we all have in common. We were all born, and we will all die. So everyone has that in common. So when you think you have nothing in common with anyone, it turns out you do. So is this already beginning to feel a little bit too heavy? I want everyone to take a deep, collective breath. Okay, and before we really get into questions, meanwhile, in New Zealand, a unique club was born.
Once you get past 73, those funerals come too frequently, so pricey, and no personality. So I thought, what's the point of living a life that's colourful and bold, and then you're told this is how your exit's going to be boring. She said, what do you do when the music stops, when you're all the way around, but there's no ticket costs? All for the price of a stupid boring box. Forget about the road. You start yourself a club, a place to share and sing your song. It's fun, but life goes on. So we started a club to make coffins our own, and set some occasion in my house. There's a workshop and a place to make the tea.
This is where we get to play and make a splash on our final day. Forget the gold and mahogany.
I'm going down to Elvis. Mine is only used as a symphony. Here's my glory box.
It's more than a club, it's our community.
Everyone was thrilled we were making lovely affordable coffins. In fact, we managed to ruffle some feathers.
Just a minute, you are causing us dismay. Stealing our pies, taking business away.
But we won them over in the end, and they just couldn't help but love us. And we just got bigger and better. We really made a mistake.
We've got to control, because face it, a funeral's got to have soul.
We never knew how awesome death could be. Forget about your love. You heard about to love, a resting place to sing our song. It's the final verse of life.
Now comes us springing up all over the place.
Forget about the love. You heard about to love, a resting place to sing our song. It's the final verse of life. It goes on.
So I did think it was important for us to laugh for a moment before we really head into such a serious topic. And I'm not encouraging each of you to build your own coffins, but I am encouraging you to think creatively, to think about what it is that you need to know before that time. And it is such a gift to your family. So I invite you to ask any questions you'd like, whether it has anything to do with memorial services, whether it has to do with what happens as you are heading into death, or whether it's actually medically, physically what is happening at death. We welcome any questions that you might have. And I guess I just come to you with the microphone. That'll work. Raise your hand if you've got any questions for any of the three of us. Wow, okay, Betty Hyder's got a question.
Talk about the significance of the quality of life that remains when someone either evolves into a situation that will never heal or something that happens precipitously and there is a choice to be made. I personally want only a quality of life that people know would be meaningful to me. I am not interested at all in prolonging life that is miserable, that involves suffering, or from which you have no opportunity of achieving something better, known as quality.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a great point you bring up. I think this question comes up a lot, and I think like a lot of things in life, it's good to be prepared for the worst, and then if things go better than that, then we're all kind of content and happy with that, and pleasantly pleased. Like Trish was saying, I think in our lives I think everyone procrastinates a little bit, and we particularly procrastinate things that are unpleasant. And so I think thinking about difficult decisions, challenges that we may face is difficult. I think one of the things I would encourage everyone to do is just talk to their decision makers, surrogate decision makers, whether that's children a lot of times or friends. And just, exactly what you just talked about. Just kind of share what's important to you, and so that way, if there's ever a situation where you're not able to speak for yourself, like say you were to have a stroke, and weren't able to talk anymore, and then these children will say is trying to make decisions for you. It's really hard to be in their shoes unless they know and have recalled you clearly expressing what's important to you and what you would want and what you don't want. Because a lot of times on my side, I'm talking to children and kind of they're faced with what would mom or dad want, and it's tough for them to make those decisions unless they've had those difficult conversations with their parents in advance. I think that's what I might have some additional thoughts, but that's what I would share right now. I mean, I think something we could talk about too. I think step one is having the right code status determined, because that often that's definitely a situation when we want to know what the person would prefer to have done at that critical moment in time, but they're obviously if they've had a code, which means they stop breathing or they're no longer a heartbeat, they're not consciously able to tell us what they would like. So having the correct code status in place to honor the patient's wishes is important, and we can talk about that if y'all want as well. But I think it's a really important point to, like you said, to think about, at least for me, I think quality of life is more important than quantity of life, like you said. And so I think having that clear goal can really help determine what should be done, because in America, we can carry things on as long as we want. We can keep doing and doing and doing, and sometimes it's hard to choose the more difficult direction, which is to do less and just focus on quality and comfort, and not necessarily on just trying to maximize the duration. Those are sort of my kind of thoughts, but I'm sure you all have other questions or Kathy might have some thoughts.
I think one thing I found out today talking to someone is what Dr. Cook was talking about, which is so important. Most people coming into Cedarfield have what they call advanced directives, which say, in the event I have a terminal illness, this is what I want. I don't want life-sustaining procedures, and the different delineations. In the state of Virginia, that is not a do not resuscitate. And I just wanted to touch on it briefly. If you're wondering if you're a do not resuscitate or not, after this meeting, go into your refrigerator and look on your vial of life, and on there it will say, do not resuscitate or full code. Basically what that means, people think, well, if I'm in the dining room and I'm choking and I'm a DNR, does that mean you guys are just going to let me fall out? And, I've heard all different types of things. My understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, a DNR comes into place, like when Dr. Cook said, you've coded, your heart has stopped, you are not breathing, you're gone. And basically what's that saying is you just want to go naturally, your heart has stopped, and that's what you're ready to go, you're deceased. If you don't have a DNR, when your heart stops, everything will be done medically to try and get that heart beat back. And that could be anything from the defibrillators, CPR, the whole works. And what Dr. Varanian has always shared with me, a lot of times when we're in our 80s, if your heart stops, they can get it going again. However, for it to be sustainable, a lot of times there is the reality that you might have to be on a life-sustaining machine. And most people say, no, I definitely don't want that. So if that were to happen and you're a full code and they get you back breathing again, but you say you need to be put on a ventilator, then that would be up to whoever you've deemed necessary are able to make those decisions to take you off of the ventilator. So just make sure, if you say, when my heart stops, I'm gone. That's it. That's my personal beliefs or my faith. Just make sure this whole meeting is that we know what your personal wishes are. They're yours, they're no one else's. No one else has the right to say, you should do this. It's a very personal decision. So just make sure that your loved ones or whoever you have appointed know what your wishes are. Get them down ahead of time so that your needs can be met. Even if, say, God forbid, you had a stroke and you can't tell us, or, you know, that we know ahead of time what it is. And if you want to become a do not resuscitate, both Lynette and I have the forms in our office. We just get them to your physician. And you can always revoke it. You can always change it. But what happens, well, we know what I found with this COVID thing I got 2 months ago. You don't know what's going to hit you and when, right? You know, I was here at work when I got sick. So it's just always better, like Trish is saying, have your affairs in order ahead of time, and that way your needs are always known.
And I want to introduce Director of Nursing, Tamika Ross, who's just joined us. She has a very busy job. Before we take any more questions, I want to give the panelists each an opportunity just in a minute or two to describe some of their experience as it relates to end of life, some of what they've seen or some of what their responsibilities are or where their jobs intersect with end of life.
Good afternoon, everyone. I apologize for being tardy. I do have a lot of experience with end of life, and I've been in a lot of situations where families have had to make that decision. And just like Kathy was saying, it's very difficult when it happens. It's always better for the family and for the healthcare provider if these decisions have been made ahead of time, because of course the family is emotional because it's their family member. And as a medical provider, we've really, you know, I've had people or families ask, well, what do you think? You know, in that situation, I can't, you know, it's all up to what the resident or the family wants. So that's why it's important to have that conversation ahead of time, because what it will do, it'll give you some relief of knowing what your family member wanted. Because if they get into a place where they can't speak for themselves and you don't know, it just leaves us in a situation where we don't know what you wanted. So I think that it's always better. I know it's a hard conversation and it's hard to think about, but when things start to happen, like Kathy said, sometimes they happen so fast you don't have time to think about it. So thinking about it when you don't need it, or you don't have to, you know, just thinking it through all the way, it's always better to have that conversation with your family so that they know what you want, and to have your DNR in place if that's what you decide to do. I do want to piggyback on what Trish was stating about a DNR and a full code. Some people think that a DNR, when you have a DNR in place, if you have a change of condition, that there will be no medical services provided. But we will provide the medical services just like we would if it was a full code. But if your heart was to stop, as if Kathy was saying, we will not do CPR. Okay? I've done CPR on people and they lived. They may not have gotten back to their baseline. And I've done CPR on people that did not live. So it's really a personal decision on what you would like. But I will say things can be okay one day and the next day they're not. And that's what we need to prepare for. Because sometimes the people that are left behind are the ones that has, hold on to that grief because they don't know what you wanted. And they just want to make the right decision for you. So have that conversation. Make sure that your family understands what you want, and make sure you have all your paperwork in place for what your desire is.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple more things there. Yeah, I guess the code status, I think, like a lot of things in life, it may not be something that we know a whole lot about, and so when you don't know a whole lot about something, it's hard to make the right decision. I think on the surface, I guess it's definitely one of those things where at different stages in life, you're kind of like wishes would change. So I think that's one thing worth saying. I think anytime there's a change in our health, or we could say it on a birthday, it's worth like reflecting on whether it's still the same choice for us, if we might want to change our choice. But even when I started the medical training, I didn't understand what a full code or a DNR was. There was some jokes in my training that like some people think, and I think there's some truth to this, but some people think DNR stands for do nothing routinely. And that's definitely like a misconception, but I thought that was humorous. But it does speak to the impressions that some people have about the DNR. So like Tamika was saying, if you can be DNR and you can have hip surgery, you can have a heart transplant. I mean, there's really everything under the sun you could have done if you're DNR. You can definitely go into surgery, you can put on the breathing machine, and then after surgery, you can take off the breathing machine. It really just speaks to what you'd want to have done, if your heart was to stop beating. And I think it's worth highlighting that, generally when someone has a code, like something really significant has happened to them to trigger that code. Might be a blood clot to their lungs, or a stroke, or a heart attack. And the key thing is, if they're successfully resuscitated, with the full code, CPR, that problem is still going to be there. And I think as well, it's worth noting that your best case scenario would be that you're coming out of the code and you're just as good as you were going in, which is more likely if you're a young person and say you drowned for a second. But when you're older, especially if there's a big event that occurred, more than likely you're going to be worse off after the code than you were going in, and then there's going to be the difficult issues with as one resident was saying, you're looking at your quantity of life might be longer and greater, but the quality of life is going to be impaired, and most people don't want that. So it's definitely an important decision, and I support any decision people make. A lot of people say, after hearing all that, I still want to be full code, and I think that's great, and I respect that. But I think sometimes people are making that decision like without all the information available to them, and I think it's hard to make an accurate decision about anything if you don't have all the details. So that's kind of what I wanted to add to. That's kind of usually what I discuss.
One of the jobs of a social worker, I know we both know Lynette and I, we're in independent living. Emily Hicks is a social worker on our assisted living area, and then Christina Craig is a social worker in healthcare. So how the social worker plays in is a couple different ways, but primarily when someone is at end of life, more than likely they're on our license side. Usually in healthcare, not always. We've had residents that decide, I'm going to stay in my independent living apartment and have 24/7 caregivers, which is ridiculously expensive. It's just crazy now, I guess, post-COVID, how expensive. It's $37 an hour for a CNA with a lot of these agencies. So, again, you want to be realistic, but you also want to realize that you're at a wonderful place and there's different levels of care, so that at end of life, money isn't necessarily something you have to consider, which is so important because that's such a stressor to begin with. But the thing is, Christina would primarily be the social worker working with you on the license side if you had end-of-life issues, whether it be code status. Sometimes, and this is one thing I wanted to share when I knew I was going to be coming today. So when I first got into the business, I thought the word hospice was like, you're really bad. You're not long for this world. And that's really not the case anymore. And when I was working on memory care, I realized so much. The families would tell me, Kathy, I just don't want to send my dad or my husband to the hospital anymore. The ER is a nightmare. He gets so confused. It's just the worst case scenario. And usually, so like what Dr. Cook was saying, doctors can do a whole bunch of different things. But sometimes we decide, you know what? We're tired. We don't want to keep going to the hospital and getting fixed. That's when we can get hospice involved. And hospice is kind of going like what you were saying, Betty, where it's a philosophy that you're looking at your quality of your life and not necessarily fixing, but making sure your remaining days on earth are what you would like. So I think just that realization that hospice isn't end all be all. The way I used to think of it is, you do have to be recertified, and there have been people who are recertified every 18 months and they keep being recertified. But basically, hospice now can be called palliative care, which is, you still have your 3 months or less, or 6 months with hospice, but a palliative care is now more of a long term, but we're not looking to fix anything, we're just looking to prioritize quality of life.
We have had some residents in healthcare that was currently, had been on hospice care the last year, and they've been discharged from hospice because they was admitted to hospice for whatever change of condition that they had, and but hospice came in. Always look at hospice as a resource because you have more people involved. You have a hospice nurse, you have a hospice CNA, you have a hospice chaplain, social worker, so it's a whole team of people. Some families love hospice because of that aspect, because they have more eyes working with their family members. But we have had 2 residents recently in the last 2 weeks that was discharged from hospice because they don't meet the criteria anymore. So just to piggyback on what Kathy was saying, hospice doesn't mean that you're dying. Hospice, sometimes with that change of condition, you want more resources in, the resources will come in, and sometimes residents turn around for the good and then they discharge from hospice. And I did want to mention as well, some families do not want hospice involved in end of life. What we normally do if we have a resident that does not want hospice services, we work with the doctors to make sure that we're focusing on comfort and quality. And sometimes we work through those. We've had several residents that have had changes of condition, and from our medical standpoint, we're thinking, oh, this may be it, and then sometimes it's not. So we have a lot of peaks and flows, and we could go the comfort care route as long as the provider and the nursing team understands what care you want and that you've requested. We'll render it, whether it's through hospice services or comfort care.
I think that everyone in the room is independent living, but I'm not sure. I know that you probably know that the chaplains do memorial services as far as end of life goes, and we do planning for services. One thing I want to make sure that you hear me saying that a chaplain will do for you here at Cedarfield is that you might just want to talk about death. And when you say to your children or to your neighbor, I don't really want to live much longer, sometimes that disturbs other people. I have heard from some of you in this room that you've mentioned to a loved one that you are tired or that you want to talk about death, and the response is something like, don't say that. You'll be just fine. I just want you to hear me saying to you, loud and clear, that I'm not afraid to talk about death. And if you want to talk about the way you feel, I'm not a medical doctor or a nurse or a social worker. I'm not going to lead you down those roads, but I'll listen to you for as long as you want to explore. So I just give that to you and know that you will be treated with open ears.
I think the other thing that I always say is if you're a couple, couples don't age the same way. People married 69, 72 years, you know, they're almost like a one, I say. You know, one can physically do the stuff and the other one can cognitively figure everything out. So together they're a whole. And I think what's important is that if something happens to you, we're able to handle it a lot better than if it happens to a loved one. I mean, hands down, we can take on more. But you hurt our spouse, you hurt our child, you hurt anyone that we love, we could be like a bowl of jelly, right? We're just like, oh. So I think it's important if you are a couple still, just to talk among yourselves, because again, that's a tough conversation, you know? Just make sure that your spouse and you understand what your wishes are, so that by all means, you know, it can be met, because one of the spouses will pass away before the other, and then that's a whole nother process that that spouse that's residing here at Cedarfield has to go through. So, you know, these are, as Trish said in the beginning, these are tough conversations, but they're important, and we really are so glad that so many of you showed up today. And just want to open it up to you and see if there's any specific questions you can ask us, or if not, maybe we can get some ideas for a future talk.
Oh gosh. I got something else.
Okay, Beverly Stevenson. I just want to mention, if you have a do not resuscitate order, which is a yellow paper, they only accept original copies. You cannot make copies and hand it off. When my husband was ill, the fire department came and they took his original copy, and I never got it back. So please make sure that you have multiple copies of a do not resuscitate order. Mine is hanging on my refrigerator.
I agree with that. If we have to send someone out to the hospital, we always make a copy to send with them, and we keep the original if it's open.
But the fire department only wanted the original. They wouldn't accept a copy, and I didn't get it back.
They have accepted the copy for us, because we won't give them the original.
Well, they took mine.
Yeah.
Okay, so I don't know if you need this in the state of Virginia or not, but if I have discussed with my daughter my end of life wishes, or and my son doesn't agree with that, do you have to have a notarized piece of anything stating the wishes, that what would be my wishes?
Because you are not adjudicated incompetent in the state, your wishes stand. So that was one thing I used to say when there was an only child, when I first got into business. Oh, that must be so hard not to have brothers and sisters. You're having to handle this on your own. On a whole, brothers and sisters don't get along at end of life, whether it's, I can't believe you're just letting mom die, or I can't believe you've agreed to this crazy surgery. So again, just, Denise, you can write down what your wishes are. You can get them notarized, but it's not necessary, because you are not incompetent and you're of sound mind. Those are your rights.
Fortunately, that won't happen to my family, because we all are kind of on the same page.
Good.
The other question, all right, so my husband is now in healthcare, and he has dementia and can't make those decisions. You know, we talked a little bit about it,
but he never would give me, because I know I want to be cremated, he never would give me an answer as to what he wanted. Now what?
You know, again, that's the hard conversations that happen. I would definitely talk with your son and your daughter and kind of do it as a, what do you think Dad or, you know, Jerry would want? The thing that is hard is that in the state of Virginia, if he has a power of attorney, he can appoint you, but if you're married in the state of Virginia, the spouse is automatically the power of attorney. So they would basically go to you and say, what are your wishes?
This, I believe, will be a question for Dr. Cook. Recently, we were exposed to the book, The Organ Thieves, where the traditional explanation of death was no breathing, no heartbeat, no pulse. And then the court decided brain death is the accepted definition of death. What is the definition of death medically today?
I think it is, brain activity. A lot of times neurologists are the ones that are involved to, categorize somebody as, having gone through, brain death. But I mean, it's true, like, you can have your heart can be beating, and you're being ventilated through a respirator, but, as far as what we consider, truly living, it's really your, the cognitive side of things and ability to think and be aware. But yeah, it's a matter of like assessing like brain waves for like an EEG. But again, I think a neurologist can give you a more thorough explanation. But I would say that that if there's brain death, then you're not really kind of living in that sense. But sometimes, like a lot of things in life, it's not black or white. Sometimes there's gray areas involved. So those things have to be considered as well. Good question, probably insufficient answer. But.
Any other questions right now?
Just a comment about hospice. I am so glad a friend of mine said to me when my mother was ill and dying, said, don't wait till the last 48 hours to get hospice involved. And so I talked with the surgeon and she said, I would look to you to give me indication of that. So about 6 weeks ahead, of course I didn't know how far ahead, but I was so glad the hospice people got to know my mother as a human being before she was no longer that way.
It's just a good point, like everything else in life. A little bit of preparation goes a long way, especially when we're kind of dealing with the unexpected and uncertain.
When planning for memorial services with families, I often ask children and friends to give me 3 words to describe the person. And whenever I have an opportunity to, I like to ask the person before they die what their 3 words are that they hope someone will use to describe them. And so I pose that question to each of you today to think of 3 words that you hope other people might use to describe you when you die. And if you are not living into each of those 3 words, you still have some time to do that. And I would encourage you to write down those 3 words as inspiration to yourself. It has been said often that we learn so much about people from their obituary. And what a shame that is. It's such a surprise. Maybe it's because people are humble and they don't want to brag. Maybe it's because we're not curious. Maybe we don't listen as much as we should or ask the right questions. But if you are the kind of person who reads obituaries frequently or attends memorial services. I hope that rather than having that be something that makes you sad, I hope that it can be something that's life-giving and affirming to you. What will people say about you? And in our office, we have a book called Last Things First. That is a workbook to just sort of get your mind thinking toward end of life, and we call it Last Things First, so that you can think clearly now about some of these important decisions, code decisions, cremation decisions, funeral versus memorial service, so that you can live the rest of your life knowing that that weight has been lifted. You get the last thing done first, and everything else seems to be a little bit easier.
I used to joke, if you signed a DNR, it guaranteed you another 10 years of life. So, I think it's important that we keep some humor, but it's so true, right? When we're all set and planned, nothing ever happens. It's when it's not planned, so, keep it levity.
And I guess I'll just add a couple more things as well. A lot of things in life you kind of learn by experience, but in this life, a lot of times, individually we only go through things once. As Trish said, we're all going to die, but we're just going to die once. So it's hard to know how to do it, what decisions to make when you don't have any experience yourself. A book was recommended to me by 3 people before I actually read it, but y'all probably have heard about it, but it's called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande. And I think he's a surgeon, but importantly, he kind of gives examples and kind of goes in great detail going through his parents' experience with, especially his dad. I remember his dad's experience with dying and death, and then a lot of patients that he came across, and then even he was just brought in. I think other physicians would bring him in and kind of share examples and cases as well. But I think that book would be really helpful to read because you can sort of experience vicariously the dying process, and then you can, I think, be better prepared for all the what ifs and permutations that might happen near the end. But there's a couple things that were really helpful to me. I think they would, when they were speaking to a child or a patient near the end, to ask what is either what do you like to do or what does Dad like to do that gives them meaning and gives life some enjoyment. And for some people it was more elaborate than others, but that was really helpful for children to be aware of, because they could see Mom or Dad in this situation and they could be like, well, Dad can't do X, Y, and Z that he loves, so he wouldn't want to be alive in this circumstance, but somebody else might be fine there. I just recommend that book.
Say it again. Being Mortal.
Yeah, it's being mortal. Rather than immortal, of course.
Well, one thing I'd like to add about end of life is that end of life is not simply the act of dying. It is a period of time that leads up to your death. So there are a lot of things to consider over and above these other things, to the little things that you might not ever think you need to tell another person. But the examples of having a stroke or a heart attack or anything where you can't communicate yourself as you once could, what are the things that you wish people knew about you? Do you love having sunlight come into your room in the morning, or does that make you crazy? There's little creature comforts. It can make a big difference, because what might seem like a simple little request might make a huge change in your daily life. Little tiny things. Write them down. Let your family members know, so that should you need to be in a position where you are being cared for but unable to express those, it would be helpful if other people didn't necessarily need to play a guessing game of, oh, I see her eyebrows are furrowed whenever I open the shades. Just those little things are so helpful. It might seem silly, but it could be helpful to somebody.
I recall one time when Trish was showing the video and we saw the person who liked Elvis. There was a lady up in healthcare who was on hospice who had had a stroke and was nonverbal, but she had shared that she loved Elvis. So it was myself and the hospice person and the CNA, and we would just play Blue Suede Shoes or a couple of, and her whole disposition, her shoulders, everything, and just having that little piece of something that brought joy to her is just a gift to be able to give, but also to hear something that you love because someone knows you, shared is also, it's just great. So, and the other thing, let your kids know, for those that have kids, because trust me, kids do not want to have this conversation with mom and dad. They're like, oh God, I can't have that. So when you make your decisions, just let your children know, this is what I've decided, this is what my wishes are, because it's really a gift, kind of like coming to Cedarfield, to give to your children or your family so that they know that you're being taken care of.
So as we're talking, I'm getting teary-eyed. I don't know why. Maybe I'm becoming weak after all these years. I don't know. I missed the remembrance service on Wednesday, because I was in orientation. So I just wanted, as we sit here and talk, I think about the times I saved people with CPR and the times I did not, and the times that I've had conversations with families and patients and residents. And not only does the conversation ahead of time help you and your family, it also helps the caregiver. Because we're not supposed to be emotionally involved, but how can we not? If we've been caring for your loved one for an extended amount of time, and like Trish is saying, I know what Mr. Jones like. I know what makes him brighten up. I know the things that he like or what the things that he don't like. But what I think I get my flowers from being involved in those moments. Because those moments don't have to be moments of stress. It can actually be very beautiful if we understand what you want. It can be very stressful if we don't understand what you want. But being here at Cedarfield and you being in independent living, and we having Kathy and we're having Trish, because when you all, if you have to come over to health services, they let us know, this is what they like, this is what they don't like, this is what the family's planning to do, this is what, Kathy's like, I've been knowing them for years, this is what they want. And we're like, okay. And we kind of like pick it up. But end of life can be beautiful. We just have to prepare ourselves for that. And from the nurse's standpoint and from the CNA standpoint and from the provider standpoint, I think that's when we collaborate and make it the best process we possibly can for you all. So we want your dignity and your respect to still be there all the way through to the end. So it's something that I take pride in. It's something that if I've had a conversation or if I know what the likes and dislikes are for the resident, we try our best to make that happen. We want your request to happen all the way up to the end. So we work very, very hard for that, but I just want you to know that what you want, we will render, and we're going to make sure that you're cared for right to the end. And that's what we do. I don't know why I'm emotional. I'm usually not. But it's a beautiful thing. Sometimes if it's unexpected, that's different. But if we're all preparing for it, and you know, we've had all the conversations, we've gotten everybody in, and it can be very peaceful, and the family, you know, they're at the bedside, and it's as peaceful as it possibly can. I will tell you what I have found that's the hardest part, because we can be preparing a family. It's usually not the resident. The resident's usually comfortable. You know, they're like, no, I don't want that. I'm fine. I don't need that. It's usually the daughters and the sons. They're like, no, we need to do this. We need to do that. And the resident's like, no, I'm fine. It's when it happens for the family. We can prepare for 3 months, 4 months, 6 months, but that actual moment is the hardest. But when your family understands that we did everything that you requested, and that it was peaceful, it was a transition, you know, that was very peaceful, you were very comfortable, we just have to accept that you've passed, and we have to understand that when you leave, it's almost like a selfish thing. We're preparing, but when it happens, it's like, oh, it actually happened. And then we celebrate your life, if that makes sense. So just know, just like your family, your daughters, your sons, you know, any family that you have involved, just remember that your healthcare family, we're right there with them, and we're all working for the same goal. So, thank you.
I'm not going to say who it is, but I just want to share that there is a resident here who recently, within the last few months, went through the checklist of pretty much every single thing that we talked about and has done it. Right down to who's doing the floral arrangement for the service, what food is going to be at the reception, who the greeters will be, the top choice of the musician, the scripture verses that this person wants at the service, and what a weight that is. All of those decisions made. And a lot of laughter happened during the planning because it wasn't under duress or stress. It was, these are practical decisions that are going to have to be made, so why not go ahead and make them?
I'm a little confused as to the purpose of an advance directive. My husband and I both had our wills drawn up, and the attorney also walked us through, and we prepared advance directives. Does Cedarfield have a copy of them? And if I was ill and was going into healthcare, would you know that I had an advance directive that prevented the introduction of feeding tubes and various other treatments that might prolong my life, and which I would rather not have. So how does that work into the care?
So Judy, on admission, we actually, the business office collects in your financial, everyone's got two charts here, a financial chart and a medical records chart. We're now going online, but any advance directives are, I've always gone to the business office, and then there's also a copy in the clinic. So we should have them in 2 places, not just one. But if you have any doubt and you just want to either call Lynette or myself and just say, I have an advance directive on file, I just want to make sure that you have it, so that all, again, the paperwork's in place and ready.
It would be sent with the patient to healthcare, that advance directive. Okay.
Yes, we do review advance directives. Say if a resident has had a change in condition, we do review it to see what was put in place by the resident.
Yeah.
Yes, we do. They make it over, they're scanned into the chart, and we're able to read it at any time.
Because it goes so much further than just a DNR.
It does. It talks about your preferences.
Yes. Okay.
And we make sure that they're rendered.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
The tricky part too is, the advance directive, although it's, often they're very thorough and they cover a lot of, what ifs, they can't cover everything. So there's often, situations and circumstances that are pretty unique, combinations of things. So a lot of times it's a little more complicated. I'd say the most important thing is to make sure you have the surrogate, decision makers kind of listed to help us there.
Is there anybody who would like to share their own personal story with either a parent or a spouse or someone that was you've all had to deal with end-of-life issues in your life and didn't know if anybody wanted to share anything that they thought could be helpful to the group here? We've all dealt with it in one way or the other, and sometimes I can share a quick one. So again, social workers make the worst patients, and I was heck on wheels when my mom was sick, but I'm trying to read up on it and learn, and I heard of, what's it called, modeling. It's as the heart starts to slow down, I guess, your feet and your toes can become bluish because not as much blood is getting down. Well, guess what? My mom passed away and I looked at her feet and I'm like, where's the modeling? I didn't realize not everybody models. So, there's different ways that people pass away, and, you can read all you want, but it's a unique experience for each and every one of us. So I just think the more knowledge we have, the more prepared we are. But I just didn't know if there was anybody who wanted just to share an experience that they had. The other question I get all the time is, I stayed with my mom and dad around the clock, and the minute I left the room to use the restroom, it happened. Well, guess what? They knew. Beyond a shadow of a doubt, I believe they knew that that's when it was going to happen. So never hold on to any, I wasn't there, they passed, I wasn't there. For 9 out of 10 times, what happens is meant to happen, and it happens, and that's life, I guess.
I was just going to bring that up. If you happen to have the luxury of knowing for yourself that you are either okay with your loved one not being in the room, or if you would prefer not to have someone in the room or your loved one, that is a great thing to communicate. Because just like Kathy said, there are so many family members who cry and say, but I just went to the bathroom, or I had just gotten home. Well, people tend to die the way that they live. And if you have been a fiercely protective parent and maybe shielded your children from certain things, or perhaps in your heart you didn't want them to have that moment, and maybe that's not true for you. Maybe you welcome having them there. But it's worth saying to them, I would love for you to be there if that's the way you feel, but it's okay if you're not. Please know that, because that is a gift to your loved ones and your families, because they really kick themselves if they feel like they weren't there. Well, oh, Ernie's got a question.
It's not a question.
Oh. It's just something that happened with my mother. We were living in Bedford, and Mother was in Bridgewater Retirement Community. And we were called one day, and they said that Mother was non-responsive, and it was time to come. I let them know we wanted to come. Please let us know. And I told the nurse who called, tell Mother to hang on, we're coming. It was about an hour and 15 minutes. So we raced down 81 and went barreling into the room, and Mother was non-responsive. But she was so peaceful, and she was still alive, and I gave her a hug, and my husband, Ernie, leaned over and he said, it's time for you to go. Your husband is waiting for you. And with that, she always did whatever Ernie told her to do. So she took a big breath, not a big breath, she didn't have that much breath at that point. She went, and she passed away.
Isn't that something?
And we had been there all of 10 minutes.
And that's why I say you think they're unresponsive. I mean, we didn't talk about that, but
she knew exactly.
Hearing is the last sense that goes. So when people are non-responsive or laying in bed, the hospice nurses have said, you know, talk with them, pray with them, put their favorite music on. You know, and here she was not responsive, and yet Ernie's like, it's time to go.
But she knew, the nurse, I told the nurse, tell her, wait for us, we're coming.
Wow.
And she did. She waited for us.
That's
Isn't that
awesome.
wonderful?
That's wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. That's awesome.
Okay. This will, I think, be our last comment or question because our time, I can't believe it's already 4 o'clock.
I just wanted to make a comment. My husband's health condition deteriorated very rapidly, and we went from independent living to health care, and please make sure that you contact the social workers. They really help make that quick transition to get him from independent living up to health care, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all, and I hope that you will reach out and let us know if there are any topics we didn't quite touch on today. It is a big conversation to have, and I think it was an important place to start. From my perspective, death is holy ground. We cannot be with our parents when they are born, but we can sometimes be with them when they pass. So for your children, if you welcome their presence, or if it's a time of maybe expressing gratitude to them or forgiveness beforehand, those are two of the big things at the end, then I encourage you to do that. And if you are someone who likes to go online, look up 5 wishes and see what you can do with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.